Let's go. Greg's got the news, Danny's got the flair. One talks the cloud, the other's out there. Servers spinning, bites keep grinning. Tech talk laughs, let's get the show winning. Cyberwise guys, we're cracking the code. Tech and chuckles on overload. Urge your dreams, cybersecurity schemes. It's the podcast you need, like coffee and memes.
Welcome to CyberWise Guys, where we break down the latest trends, threats, and technologies in cybersecurity, helping you stay one step ahead and cyberwise. Our guest today is Robert Weiland. Robert is an incident response manager with Sophos. He is a seasoned cybersecurity leader with deep hands-on experience helping organizations respond to and recover from real-world cyber incidents. He works closely with customers and channel partners right on the front lines of threat detection, incident response, and ransomware defense, which gives him a unique perspective on how attacks actually unfold and what truly works when it matters the most. Welcome to the show, Robert. Nice to see you again.
Welcome.
Good to see you, Danny. Greg, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. For those listeners and viewers who are not familiar with you, would you mind taking a minute, Robert, and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Robert Weiland, manager of incident response at Sophos. I've been working in cybersecurity for the last 6 years, all of that being within incident response. And I got my start in the working world in IT in the 2000s, worked in IT for over a decade doing all the things, side support, project, IT project management, networking, server administration, Active Directory administration. Can you reset my password? For the fifth time this week. All the, I've kind of had a varied experience and worn lots of different hats. But for the last 6 years, been focusing on responding to cyber incidents, the vast majority of which I would say have been ransomware, which of course is quite known to be prevalent. But that's a little bit about me.
Nice. So Robert, I'm curious. So what moments in your career have really shaped the way that you view cyber defense today?
It's hard to kind of pick a moment that kind of influenced me. I'd say, when I was first kind of making the transition from IT to cyber, and Danny knows about my experience here because this is actually how we met. I was studying for the CISSP. Essentially, we were in a program that was covering that, and it really got me thinking about how to interface. And one thing I was, I think quite good at in the IT realm was being able to interface the IT to the business side, like not doing the tech talk, but that was a real influence to me to understand that you need to be able to talk to business leaders to understand that they need to invest in security, not just IT. Right. I think, they're bought in on IT because that's more services, more availability, more sales, all that type of stuff. But it has to come with the correct response to the risk there. And I think that's something that up till today, a lot of businesses, especially I'd say within the small to medium business sector, they're kind of ignoring that, and I think that's a big problem. So I mean, I would say that it's not one thing; it's every single thing. And a lot of times I get into an incident, it's kind of the same kind of story over and over again. So it's not one thing; it's almost kind of like everything.
So
Gotcha.
When you look at that transition from IT into the cyberspace, were there any transferable skills that you had that you brought with you, whether there's soft skills or more kind of technical skills?
Yeah, both for sure. Within the incident response realm that have served me very well has been being able to communicate, both written and verbally. My experience doing desk side support, going to talk to whether it's an executive or whatever is having a problem with their laptop or something like that, being able to speak to them in the technical terms, but able to kind of make it layman. And then of course, I had some experience kind of being the mouthpiece of IT. So sending out communications to employees across the board, the whole organization. This is what's happening. These are the policies. This is how you have to behave. That's been really helpful. You need to be able to talk to people and communicate in an incident response, right? You got to be able to know how to ask the right questions and not be afraid to ask the questions that might be a little uncomfortable. That's going to happen every single time. And of course, from the technical aspect, absolutely. It was kind of it was a very smooth transition for me, let's say, an understanding, how networks work, how firewalls work, how computers work, understand literally, the OSI model, knowing how the
Right.
architecture of a computer works helps you to troubleshoot. And
Right.
when you're dealing with threats, you need to know, how is the threat actor acting in the environment, and what things are they,
Right.
how does WinRM work? How does BMI work? Knowing what these things
Right.
are and how they work. And I've certainly learned a lot. Not that I knew it all. It's like I've been on a learning
Right.
journey for the last 6 years for sure. I continue that to this day. But yeah, having an IT background where you also have experience communicating, it was a very smooth transition to IR for me. And that has served me very well.
Excellent. And that's important because a lot of discussion has even, not just even recently, but since cybersecurity has really come into the industry as a position that you can get an entry level, there's been some discussion about missing the fundamentals of networking and how computer operations and how all of that boils down to having a solid cybersecurity basis so that you can build on your analyst skills, really. Looking back, and Robert, you also bring up a great point about the soft skills. My experience is those soft skills, the being able to explain and communicate to stakeholders, especially those in leadership positions, that is really, I think, the most understated of all of the requirements of being in cybersecurity. What is your thoughts on this? What skills or experiences really matter if you're going to be successful in cybersecurity, especially someone who's new coming in and wanting to be in the cybersecurity field?
Yeah, I think that really depends on what kind of role in cyber that you want to go for, because it's a big tent,
important.
right? But
Yeah.
if I was to focus on I think it would vary drastically if you're talking about GRC versus SOC versus IR. The different skill sets are required in each of those things.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, kind of to your point about like not having some of the technical foundations, like I think there are a younger crop of cybersecurity professionals. This is kind of like a thing, like where it's like you can become a cybersecurity professional right out of college. And I'm not saying that you can't. I know people who are excellent incident responders who do not have a technical background historically, and they've been able to kind of work really hard. Let's be honest, they had to work really hard to kind of get themselves to a position where they know enough to be not just dangerous, but actually useful. And so, yeah, like I think it's a taller order. Like if you want to go into from a cyber security degree right into incident response, there's going to be things that I think, just from kind of what I've seen in the industry, things that you don't have a lot of knowledge about. Number one that I could pick on is like Active Directory. We could have a whole, the three of us probably just talking about identity and Active Directory being targeted in every single incident that happens. And I guess it depends on when you catch it. If you're catching it as it's coming in, maybe you could, if you detect it, you could stop it before. But if an incident is progressing, it's going to hit identity. And I don't think that, like, if you don't have 10 years of or 5 years of Active Directory administration under your belt, you're not going to know a lot of what these things are, how they work. But the threat actor knows how to exploit those things. So you need to know. So there's knowledge gaps that need to be filled. And as I said, like, I don't think it's something that you can't overcome, because I've seen it done. But I think the logical stepping stone for people is IT and then into cyber. And I'm not trying to gatekeep. I'm just trying to say, that there's benefits to that, right? There's real benefits that I personally, have experienced. And that's been my experience. So it's not the only way, but I think it's if you do it, it works out well.
You mentioned identities, and that is an important part of attacks or incidents that you see. So is that something that you see on a day-to-day basis? And where would you spend most of your time helping customers or partners?
Yeah, so a lot of the way that we respond to identity is proactively, like not necessarily seeing every single credential that's compromised in an environment, but just assuming that it is. So it's kind of like global password resets, KRBTG with KRBTGT, which is the Kerberos account that famously you need to reset it twice. For reasons that this technically we'll go there, but resetting those things proactively. Now, what's really in order is like an Active Directory assessment to figure out where the vulnerabilities are. We know that credentials are compromised. Sometimes we see it, and sometimes we don't. And a big reason, I would say, like, there's been a huge trend in the last, anecdotally for sure, for the incidents that I've been in or directly involved in, is a lot of VPN compromise. And when they come in through the VPN, directors are bringing in their whole toolkit into the environment. This is what people don't understand. I get a lot of questions like, how did they compromise that? It's like, well, they had a Kali box in your network, and they were doing responder, and they were Kerber roasting accounts. They would just ask, Active Directory, hey, tell me who's in the domain group, and it just happily goes, yeah, here's all the domain admins. Anything else you want? And so it's like, credentials get popped so easily. But there's known vulnerabilities within Active Directory that have continued to be documented over the last 15 years, but organizations are not retroactively fixing those problems because, well, their network's working. If it's not broke, don't fix it. There's vulnerabilities contained within there. Kerber roastable service accounts, the way that certificates exist in the network that can be used as a privilege escalation path to domain admin, all kinds of stuff like this. So we, as an incident, going back to kind of the question, as incident responders, we don't necessarily get bogged down in trying to solve all the identity problems. We take a proactive or kind of a preventative approach to say, let's just reset everything, knowing that we've evicted the threat actor out of the environment. They don't have their hands on AD anymore. It doesn't get rid of those inherent vulnerabilities, but you're good to go now because every day might be costing you 100,000, 200,000, $1 million. It's like you got to get back to business. We got to assess the risk properly and then go and have a go forward plan. We can't just be like, oh, lock it down forever until everything is perfect. It's like, well, then that's the end of business as we know it.
Exactly. So that's interesting. You say that about Active Directory. Is there any other old school threats that are making a comeback that has surprised you recently?
Yeah, I've recently seen just the proliferation of some old like worms and viruses going around networks. Which was kind of shocking to me. Sometimes companies make an effort to increase their security posture, and then they find out what's actually been latent in the network for a long time, and they get surprised, and they treat it like an incident. It may not actually be, but it can be surprising. So I would say like that was kind of a weird anecdotal one where I'd say there wasn't really a threat, but in terms of kind of like old school threats, I'd probably say no, but just that's probably because it's not coming to mind. But I'm sure that what's old can be made new again.
Right.
And so people forget one thing and then it comes back, and
On the global stage, are there any techniques or threat actors that are giving defenders such as yourself the biggest headaches?
Yeah, I would say there's been a definite uptick in the last year, potentially more, of supply chain attacks. As things become more interconnected, there's risks inherently associated with that. Two examples that I can kind of bring up is there was one, this is something that our MDR team dealt with last year, which was the MSP of a simple help RMM tool, right, that they were using to manage their customers, got popped because there was a vulnerability. And so now that incident isn't just, so the MSP is having an incident because there was this vulnerability that was discovered and then exploited in the wild. Like sometimes these things are really hard to prevent. Like nobody did anything wrong there, right? I mean, maybe you could say that the programmer of the software, but again, these things happen. We know these things happen. How are you going to react to that is really kind of the question. So definitely supply chain attacks. And another one that was more recent is the NPM packages being compromised.
Right.
And then they were downloading GitHub, Truffle Hog, and grabbing AWS secrets, stuff like that. So again, another supply chain attack. People are using software that's trusted, then it gets compromised. Then that compromise leads to incidents that leads to the exfiltration of data, or could lead to ransomware threat actors, all kinds of things. So these are things that are these are really the things I would say that probably keep people up at night, is like because they can, something that could be perfectly fine today could be your Achilles heel tomorrow. And so how do you deal with that? It's about thinking about things in defense in depth. Like, okay, if that fails, what's the next hurdle a threat actor would have to jump over? Or if I don't think I can stop something, how quickly could I detect it? At least that, right? At least that, like at least know what's going on. There's no silver bullet for cybersecurity, but it needs to be thought about holistically. And then have a qualitative risk-based analysis. What does this mean to the business? And it could be quantitative, right? It's like, well, this means that we're going to lose $1 million a day or something like that. It's like, okay, we need to put some time and some effort and potentially some money behind this, some investment to ensure that we have the right way to deal with it. But yeah, I think this is just going to be something that will continue to escalate. It has a force multiplier effect behind it. When you compromise things, that have such a huge, like a tidal wave of downstream effect. That's you put in this little bit much effort and you get that much compromise. It's kind of scary.
Do you see with addressing those threats, threats that are more persistent, that customers or partners are underestimating or just kind of believing flat out? I know you said that you sort of have to persist and traverse down the MITRE attack chain essentially, but do you see threats or really vulnerabilities that continue to be really underestimated or just missed consistently more than others?
Yeah, it's nothing really comes to mind there exactly.
Okay.
On that. Yeah.
And that's okay, because it's hard, everything being interconnected as it is, it's hard to separate something out, that one thing or two things. So, but I think you made a great statement about the fact that there are all of these interconnected attacks, and that we do need to not just focus on, say, exploitation or reconnaissance. We need to go and move right down the line in this layered defense model.
Yeah, and just like as a bit more of a response to that, I would say like in many cases, I would say it's not necessarily an underestimation. Like we'll come in and we'll find vulnerabilities, but it's not as if a risk analysis had been applied by that company.
Right.
They weren't aware of it, or they're not paying attention. They're getting stretched too thin. Budgets are the same. The headcount might be less and the budget's less, but do more. That could be that is a factor, I think.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
People don't necessarily know enough about what's going on in their environment. When the Log4j happened, do we have Log4j in anything? It's like, maybe it'd be good to have an asset list, even a software asset list of what are our dependencies? What's our dependencies library?
Right.
I mean, that's drilling down pretty far, because like that's coming packaged in with another software package you have. That would be being very diligent. So I don't even fault people for maybe not knowing that, but a lot of times there's even more obvious things. Like, do we even have what kind of VPN do we use? It's like, okay, not that I've heard that question, but maybe as an exaggeration, like what kind of firewall do we use? We've heard that there's a vulnerability. So you definitely need to know that. And again, that's an exaggeration. I haven't heard anybody say that to me, but that's the kind of.
Wouldn't be surprised.
I wanted to ask you what are customers completely missing out on or completely underestimating, but I think we got a pretty good answer for that. And it sounds like they're not starting with the basics, which is you need to know what you have in your environment, right? If you don't know what you have, you cannot protect it. So I think that's probably a pretty strong baseline to start at. But we spoke about what happened, and looking forward, can you talk a little bit how the AI wagon changed the incident response engagements that you are involved in, both from your perspective as a defender and maybe when it comes to what you see from bad actors? Yeah,
for sure. So I would say that in a lot of the cases that we're seeing, it's hard to tell that AI is being used really. So I think we're talking about professional threat actors that let's just take like a ransomware threat actor group. They've been relying on a very strong skill set of ransomware software development, of a red teaming or like a hacker playbook, right? That they're running that gets them in, gets them credentials, gives them visibility to network, and then data exfiltration and encryption, double extortion. That playbook is still in use. They don't need a force multiplier of AI, at least on the post beachhead, post compromise side of things. They've got their playbook that they're hands-on keyboard on, and that unfortunately, as we all know, it has been working in too many cases. I'd say on more kind of like the, phishing side of the house, scam emails, scammer, the low level, what we've seen with AI in the threat landscape is a lower cost to entry, both knowledge-wise. The knowledge gap is now being covered by AI in order to get started in setting up scam websites and all this type of stuff. Like all that knowledge can be obtained through that. And then it also is that force multiplier that can do a lot very quickly. So it's more, I think, on the lower level, the less skilled side of the threat landscape. That's the same that we've seen with like spam and phishing, where it's like cast a very wide net. But now those grammar mistakes are disappearing. now it's perfect grammar.
Right.
So it's changed some things, but I think that what we're seeing in AI, probably on both sides of the house, on the threat actor side as well as the defender side of things,
Yeah.
although I think less so. I know, and I'll clarify that in a second. But like, is the bleeding edge of AI, generative AI and agentic AI, and it's iterative. So it's creeping in, but it's not, the use cases are not the killer app right out of the gate.
Yeah.
Not right now.
Right.
Now on the defender side, to clarify, like, I mean, Sophos, a lot of other, if not all other AV vendors and EDR, XDR vendors, they're using machine learning in the back end, right? So we're not relying on heuristics. We're not relying on signatures. We're actually now relying, and for years have been, for probably over a decade or more, have been relying on machine learning AI to identify unknown threats.
Right.
Based off of all the knowledge about every other threat that's ever existed in our database, right? And it can do that in an instant, right? And so I think, right, to a degree, the investment and the prior experience in this area is in the winning camp, where the power is with the organizations, the defenders, the AV vendors and XDR. Like, so I think we've got that on our side right now. So I think this is a good thing. There's a danger that this is going to escalate from the threat actor side and become a bigger problem, to the point where it lowers that barrier to entry to the ransomware threat actors and introduces newer and more prevalent groups than what we've already seen in the past, and they don't even require the knowledge. Like, there's a danger that could happen. Right. But I think right now, I think that's maybe that's overstating it, but certainly it's not a risk. It's not a zero risk.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a little bit about my perspective on it.
Yeah.
On kind of where that's at.
So from the defender's point of view, how has that changed how the detection and response timelines work? So I know when you were speaking about using machine learning and how that's really a critical aspect of defining these patterns in attack, from the analyst or from the incident responder perspective, how is that changing or has changed that detection, how we're building either our detection rules or what we do in our response timelines? Can you talk a little bit how those are affected by AI being harnessed by attackers?
Yeah, so I think for defenders, at least within kind of like incident response and incident response consulting, where we're doing disk-based imaging and triage-based images and doing forensic analysis, we're able to use AI to help make tools to overcome analytical problems that we might incur. Or if we're getting logs from a system that we've not encountered before, and we say, well, what do these things mean? Being able to use AI to help you understand what some of the log is trying to tell you, because you've maybe never seen it before, but the work still needs to be done. Is there a threat here? What did the threat actor do? So that can really be a benefit to have that. But again, I think it is kind of like iterative. It's not like the famously kind of memed lethal forensicator. So it's not like the easy win button, but it is a tool that I think helps to close the knowledge gap for defenders as well, right? Yeah. So where I said, threat actors, it can close the knowledge gap, it can close the cost gap or the barrier to entry. That same thing is true for defenders too. So if there's a more junior person who's coming into IR and they don't know how to do something, as long as the data that you're putting in and that prompt that you're using is trusted, and a lot of companies have their own that are sanctioned for certain types of uses, you can use that to really help you learn, right? So that it's speeding up that process. The learning curve, instead of, being like steep and long, is now going to be, shallow and shorter. So you're going to get to where you need to be knowledge wise faster. So I think there's advantages there, but it's not, again, that kind of like easy I win button. At the end of the day, I couldn't go to a customer and say, yeah, we did all the analysis and AI did it. I'm like, I just couldn't trust it. We need a human being who actually knows what the threats are, knows what those logs mean. We need RI, real intelligence. Real intelligence hasn't left the chat. Still have to, we still have to be there. And indeed, that's what, like for our practice at Sophos, like that's what customers need, and that's what they pay for, and that's what they want. Is they bring in the real people who have the experience, who are going to give you the answer. We need to evict a threat actor out of an environment. We need to be able to have a recovery plan and get back to business, and that needs to be as short as possible and as reliable as possible. So maybe one day AI will take a bigger chunk of that, but right now I would say it's still like a tool in the toolbox. Yeah.
AGI is
So,
still just a goal, not yet a reality.
so Robert, when you walk into an organization that experienced a breach, what are some of the security basics that you're kind of like that you find most often are missing?
So controls and things that are missing.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would say one of the things that is still lacking is multi-factor authentication.
Mm,
really.
Yeah,
Still.
wow.
yeah, it's still lacking. There are still organizations that have not rolled it out for the same excuse that we heard 10 years ago, that that's too much work to log in, where everybody on this call, and pretty much everybody that I know, is like, we've been doing it, and it's not too much, right? It's a necessary security feature. So
Right.
MFA is one of them. Other things that are missing are kind of attack surface management. That kind of is the other side of the coin of like knowing what you have, but also knowing what you're exposing.
Mhm.
Still, companies not knowing what they're exposing.
Right.
I had a long time ago was working on an incident where somebody from the company said, oh, I didn't tell anybody about that VPN that had a vulnerability, that he knew had a vulnerability. And I'm like, well, there's no secrets on the internet. There's this thing called Shodan or
Right.
Census
Exactly.
or probably a bunch of other ones, right? And it's like, so there's really no secrets. So, knowing what you're exposing to the network, understanding the risk, having good log retention is also still missing. Having your firewall logs, sending data to a syslog or a SIEM or something with
Mhm.
retention that goes back at least 90 days,
Yeah.
maybe 180 days. Again, every company can do their own assessment and find out what works, what's necessary for them, what meets their risk appetite, what the cost benefit analysis is, whatever, however you want to slice it. But a lot of these things still missing, as well as like air gapped backups in like kind of like a 3-2-1 approach, where you're keeping
Right.
something offsite or offline on a different media, just not, or even testing your backups, And so then we're restoring backups for the first time, in the response to the incident. Not the ideal scenario that we want to be in, right? So there's a lot of low hanging fruit that organizations can be doing, and it's just something that I think, and not to pick on people, but like it's business leaders, they're not prioritizing it. Somewhere
Right.
along the line, that's not being understood as important and necessary, and what they're doing is risky.
And,
So
and
yeah.
and do you feel there is a difference between larger enterprises and the SMBs in that regards? That where smaller businesses are kind of, you know what, I'm doing what I can and I'm doing the best I can, as opposed to enterprises that are kind of like the boards and the CISOs and the CIO are held to account if something happens. Do you see a difference in their approach to that?
Definitely. Yeah. So larger enterprises have gotten the message. They understand security. And I think a big part of it is not even, it might be unfair to say they've gotten the message. It might be, they've got the budget, they've got the
Mhm.
Yeah.
resources to throw at that. And I think there's a lot of benefit to having your own in-house SOC if you can afford it, right? If you're a big enough
Right.
enterprise, then that actually makes dollars and cents to you. And now you've got people who are security minded, who are looped in with all the other, the operations, the IT operations, and they're talking to each other, and they know the network, they know the people. That's a big advantage, but it doesn't work for everybody. And so,
Right.
yeah, like definitely SMB is the area where folks are kind of getting left behind, and I
Yeah.
think that's where things like MDR services are really beneficial, because it can kind of be like you're getting that additional visibility where you're not having to manage your own EDR,
Right.
that you don't have people who are able to log in all the time. It's important to be able to understand what's happening and really know how to use that tool. If you
Right.
don't, you're paying money for it, and it looks nice and it's a box that gets checked, but when something goes wrong, how do you know you're responding to it correctly and in a
Right.
timely manner? And we've seen that too, right? Where people have the products that, they're doing a lot of good things, but
Mhm.
it doesn't end up being enough. And it's not that anybody had any bad intentions. It's just the right resources were not there when they needed to be.
Robert, do you have any suggestions on recommendations on how partners can better position these proactive services like MDR really before incidents happen. So how do we position this as partners to customers when we're talking about left of bang, right? So everything you've talked about so far makes sense as far as explaining that. But how do we position that for our partners to present that to customers?
Yeah, I think it's, having a realistic conversation about what that organization themselves is going to be really capable to do from from a knowledge perspective, from that tooling perspective. Do they know how to operate that security stack? And are they going to be able to do it 24 hours a day?
Right.
That's what you get when you subscribe to a managed service, is that you get that. And not only that, you're getting seized threats all the time. Right. That's literally all they do, is they're looking at threats all the time and knocking them down. And so they know the threat landscape. They know that tool. They're going to respond very quickly. I think it should give a lot of peace of mind to many organizations to have that level of support, really, to having that eyes on the glass and knowing that 24/7 that alert's going to be looked at. Yeah. And it's going to be understood. It's not going to be blown out of proportion. If it doesn't require a big response, then it won't get one.
Right.
And those people will know that. If you're relying on your own team that's not dedicated to that, you're not going to be able to respond fast enough. And you might not respond appropriately. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways that you could look at the benefits of MDR. I think maybe that's some of the most important points, but I'm sure there's more benefit as well. Just even having quarterly reports, stuff like that, can be really nice to be able to show to senior management, this is the security posture that we have. This is how we're dealing with things. It gives a lot of peace of mind, I think.
So do you feel there is not you said earlier there's no silver bullet and there's no 100% security, but do you feel that there is a blueprint that realistically would be a good enough security for, let's say, the SMBs or the mid-size organizations today?
So is MDR that thing, or is there
MDR is probably part of it, right? The basics would be to have probably start with Active Directory that you've mentioned earlier, and having MFA in place, and then MDR service, right? But do you feel like there is, from where you sit, right, and responding into incidents, do you feel there is a blueprint or a framework that if they will follow this blueprint, they would be much better protected, realistically understanding budget limits and expertise and skills and all of that?
Yeah. So I think one thing to add on to that blueprint, starting, if we say MDR, and then having an incident response plan or an incident response playbook that you can run. The MDR team, whoever they are, is not necessarily going to know. In fact, they're not going to know everybody within the organization. How do you want to communicate that an incident's happened, that something might have gone down, that there's a lack of availability? Having something like that is really helpful. It prepares that company. So there's still other proactive things that need to be done by the team. Like, it doesn't say anything about the network to have MDR. So having either NDR or doing attack surface management, knowing what you're exposed to, as I already brought up, and having an incident response plan, a disaster recovery plan, things that internally the organization can rely on, so that they're not trying to think about, who do I need to tell to do that? Or who's responsible for that? Those critical pieces of the organization should be known prior, and then potentially even doing, once you've established that, doing some tabletop exercises where you're role playing that out, where you're saying, okay, we've had an incident. There's been a ransomware incident. Okay, now who's our insurance policy? Don't know. Okay, you better get that down, right? Like, gotta call your insurer, or who's going to be our legal counsel, or any of these types of questions. Where's our offsite backups located? All these types of questions. And then going beyond that, as your maturity, so like these types of things, like that we call proactive services or readiness, is kind of a journey towards your internal maturity in responding to security threats. Then you can get into functional exercises. And that's where a simulated incident is done on, it looks like hands-on keyboard. It's all in a lab environment, and you go in and you investigate it. How's your team faring with being able to understand these threats? Can they find that, someone ran Mimikatz on this system at this time, and it was detected and it was stopped. It looks like, this is everything that was involved in that process, and that was the parent process. And before that, they moved laterally from the VPN, or can they put that all together? So as it definitely, MDR is not just going to solve all your problems if you don't have good coverage, if you don't have good deployment, the threat actor will find where there's gaps. They'll find out where there's
Right.
no visibility. It
Right.
doesn't say anything about how your VPN is being managed or where your firewalls are being managed or where any of that data is going. So yeah, there's
Right.
still a lot of other things that need to be considered. MDR should not be thought of as a silver bullet or a panacea, but I think it is a
Right.
great, very important piece of the puzzle, because that's really where the rubber starts to hit the road in terms of a beachhead has been established within the Active Directory or a system, and then
Right.
things start to get really nasty. Then data is getting breached, exfiltration could be happening, encryption could be happening. But I've got MDR, I shouldn't have encryption. They should stop that.
Right.
They don't have MDR on your ESXi host. I'll tell you that, because that doesn't exist. And so they'll encrypt all your VMDKs. And that's happened. That's happened too many times to too many organizations. There's no silver bullet. It requires, thoughtful and dedicated planning and maintenance of your whole security posture and risk assessments. It's not a short
It's not
order.
a
It's a tall
one size fit
order,
all.
right?
Yeah.
And it's not one size fit all. No, it's bespoke and customized every single time.
Yeah, you brought up a number of examples there, and I was curious as I was listening to you explain all of those. From all what you mentioned, and maybe what you haven't mentioned, have you had a real world incident that has significantly or even completely changed how you view cyber risk?
No.
And that's okay if you haven't, because I know
Yeah.
for me, my experience has been incremental and step by step for the way I look at cybersecurity.
Yeah.
But I was curious if there was one particular thing that you kind of shifted on that made you change your thinking.
So I mean, the way that I would answer that is that how I view the risk is not the be all and end all. When I'm working with a customer who's having an incident, I need to get their buy-in that, like, I'll explain it from my perspective. This is how risky I think this is. Is that acceptable? Or if a customer is saying, no, we need to go live with this system, I'll be like, whoa, I wouldn't recommend that. There's some serious risks associated with that. Before I it's their network. They could do it, but before I let them do it, I'll be like, before you do that, I want you to understand the implications of what that could mean. And so we need to really understand, if we go live with that system, we don't know that we've eradicated the threat. So, just as an example, right? So I would say, like, the way that I view risk is going to be viewed through the lens of each and every customer that I'm working with. I'm going to try to get an understanding from them. I'm going to apply all my experience and knowledge about the technology and past experience to try to give them the most informed and reasonable assessment on whatever item we're talking about, right? So it could be holistically, it could be specifically to certain things. Like I don't want to say to a customer, like, you have to shut down your whole network for 3 weeks. My question is, like, where's the most pressure going to come from? That's the question. Like, to be able to ask that question. And one thing that we have to do is that people could be in a crisis, and we have to stay out of the crisis. If I go into a crisis with the customer, now we're both running around like chickens with our head cut off. So clear heads must prevail. Talk to that customer about, like, where's the pressure going to come from? Or even if it's not there yet, where's it going to come from? Let's get ahead conversationally. How are we going to deal with that? How can we get ahead of the game, be able to poke holes in the firewall? Those are what I call my pressure release valves, where we know, like, well, we're not introducing too much risk here. No, it's okay. It's going to be okay. We're monitoring. We don't expect anything, but we've got our eyes on it. So risk is always informed alongside the customer. That's where I like to have a consensus, and we come to an agreement that we all feel good about the decisions that they're making. And I'm there to try to help them understand that from the incident response perspective. Like, this is what this is going to mean. And sometimes people think, like, they'll think, like, oh, this is so risky. And I'll come in and say, no, it's not. Don't even worry about it. Like, without giving a specific example, sometimes they're thinking about it. They're in a crisis. They just want to lock everything down. It's like, we don't need to do that. That's good news for you. You don't need to do that. Here's the plan, So yeah, risk is always like that.
It really sounds like one of the major mistakes that customers used to do when face an incident is shutting everything down. They would not have a plan, and then they would shut everything down. Would that be a fair characteristics of the biggest mistakes organizations can make?
I mean, I wouldn't say going into an emergency. I mean, I often recommend an emergency containment once I understand, the situation and what the implications of that are going to be. But, like, that can buy valuable time to conduct an investigation, gain some clarity, and make much more informed decisions. That said, it's not always feasible. Companies that just cannot do that. And so then you need to talk about various different types of emergency containment, of certain sections of the network, segments of the network, VLANs, cutting off IPsec tunnels and all the rest of it, right? So sometimes customers do come to us and they've already pulled all the plugs, right? And that's not necessarily the right thing to do. That shows that they haven't really prepared for when an incident's going to happen. So they just kind of they just react. That's not wrong. I wouldn't want to browbeat anybody and be like, you shouldn't have done that. Well, if you did what you thought was best at the time, now that we've got the people, the advisors in, let's talk about how we can change the plan, right? And make it a little more in line with what the risk of the situation really is. But certainly that could be a mistake, but it's not always. Really what the mistake there, Danny, if I could say, the mistake was that they didn't plan, right? So they're reacting as opposed to executing a playbook, executing what they have thought about beforehand and said, this is the right way to handle the situation. So I think that's really where the mistake was, right? It's really, totally, not that you did, not that you blamed anybody, but it would be totally unfair to blame somebody who had no opportunity to plan and say, you did it all wrong, But planning's got to be forefront of mind.
So if you could give one piece of advice from your point of view to CISOs or IT leaders or security leaders, which is based on experience, what would that be? Aside of make a plan, practice and execute when the time comes.
So, some other things that I could mention that kind of go beyond that, but specifically to defenders is test your tool stack, that it's doing what you're expecting it to do, that you know how to use it. Centralize your tool stack, which is to say, allow it to be conducted as a uniform process by everybody on the team. So if someone pulls, if you're deploying, let's say Velociraptor or something I want to pull artifacts from a host, have a centralized process for that, or even an orchestration tool that's on a VM. You spin it up in response to an incident, so it's clean, right? The threat actor hasn't been in there for 3 weeks. You bring it up, you start, and then you start acquiring things, and then maybe you need to hand it off to the next region that's coming online that shift. When you hand it off to them, it's like, oh, what are these artifacts? I'm not familiar with this format, and now it takes them 6 hours instead of it could have taken them 2. So that's some recommendations. And then again, another note I had for myself here was to, keep track of your attack surface. But I think I beat that horse to death already. Definitely understanding your tools and being ready to use them, knowing that they're reliable, because you don't want to have your tool fail you in the middle of an incident, right? Like, how do you use it? Is this the correct output? Should this be this way? Is it broken? Now you're really in trouble because you're not even relying on the thing that was supposed to help you do the work. So that might be kind of a sleeper pick that I have for defenders.
Well, thank you, Robert. Yeah, and thank you, Greg, as always. And thank you for our listeners and viewers for tuning in to CyberWise, guys. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay CyberWise.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Let's go. Greg's got the news, Danny's got the flair. One talks the cloud, the other's out there. Servers spinning, bytes keep grinning.